Evelyn Walker was simply trying to visit her grandson when a routine airport check-in turned into a humiliating act of racial discrimination. But instead of backing down, Evelyn fought back, and what followed was a battle that shook a powerful airline and ignited a movement for justice. How does one woman's quiet strength spark such a powerful change? Will she succeed in holding the company accountable? Subscribe and comment below with your thoughts on how Evelyn's fight will unfold. Don't miss the powerful story of Evelyn Walker. Evelyn Walker sat in her modest living room, gently packing a few items into her small suitcase. A framed picture of her late husband, David, sat on the nearby mantelpiece, his eyes still seeming to smile with that familiar warmth. Evelyn smiled softly as she glanced at the photo. David had always been the one to calm her nerves, and she felt a twinge of sadness that he wasn't here to do that today. The quiet hum of her phone brought her back to the present. It was her grandson, Marcus, texting to let her know he couldn't wait to see her. He had recently started his first semester at Columbia University, and Evelyn was both proud and anxious to see how he was settling in. This would be the first time she'd traveled since David passed, and though she looked forward to seeing Marcus, the thought of navigating the airport alone filled her with unease. She exhaled slowly, resting her hands on her knees. "It'll be fine," she whispered to herself, trying to shake off the anxiety. "It's just a short flight, and I'll be there with Marcus soon enough." But deep down, Evelyn knew her apprehension wasn't just about the travel. It was about something else, something more insidious. A lifetime of subtle and not-so-subtle reminders that, as a black woman in America, her presence in certain spaces was often unwelcome. At 65, Evelyn had learned to carry herself with grace and patience, but that didn't make the sting of discrimination any less painful. She wasn't new to it. She was just tired of it. She zipped up her suitcase and grabbed her travel documents from the kitchen counter. Her ticket was tucked neatly into her purse, and she'd checked the details several times over the last few days, just to make sure everything was in order. "Everything's fine," she repeated, feeling the comforting weight of David's words in her heart. "Don't let anyone make you feel less than who you are," he'd always say. "You walk in with your head held high, Evelyn. You've earned your place." Those words echoed in her mind as she gathered her things and headed for the door. The airport was as bustling as Evelyn had expected. As she made her way through the sliding doors, the familiar chaos of travelers, airport staff, and the constant drone of announcements filled the air. The excitement of seeing Marcus helped push down the knot of anxiety in her stomach, but it was still there, lingering. She got in line at the check-in counter, double-checking her documents once again. The line moved quickly, and soon it was her turn. A young white woman with a name tag that read Jessica Miller stood behind the counter. Evelyn offered a polite smile as she handed over her ticket and ID. Jessica took a quick glance at the documents, her expression immediately indifferent. "Your ticket has expired," she said flatly, barely looking at Evelyn as she tapped on her keyboard. Evelyn blinked, momentarily thrown off. "I'm sorry?" Jessica sighed, the annoyance in her tone unmistakable. "Your ticket's invalid. You won't be able to board this flight." Evelyn's heart tightened. She'd been so careful with everything, double-checking the ticket multiple times. "There must be a mistake," she said, trying to remain calm. "I bought the ticket in advance, and I checked it just this morning." Jessica glanced up at her, her eyes cold and dismissive. "It's invalid. Step aside." For a moment, Evelyn just stood there, stunned. It wasn't just the refusal, it was the way Jessica said it, like she didn't even see Evelyn as a person, just a problem to be dealt with and moved out of the way. Around her, other passengers, most of them white, were being helped without issue. Evelyn felt the familiar pang of injustice wash over her, the same feeling she'd had so many times in her life. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. She wasn't the type to back down without at least trying to understand what was happening. "Please check again," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm sure my ticket is valid." Jessica rolled her eyes and tapped on the keyboard once more, her disinterest palpable. "I already told you, ma'am. Your ticket is invalid. Next." The cold dismissal sent a wave of anger through Evelyn. Her gaze shifted to the man at the next counter who had just been handed his boarding pass without any hassle. Why was she being treated differently? Evelyn wasn't about to let this go. She knew this wasn't just a mistake. This was about something deeper. The way Jessica had looked at her, the tone in her voice, it was all too familiar. The anger that had simmered just below the surface for so long began to rise, but Evelyn knew she couldn't afford to let it out. Not here, not now. She turned away from the counter and made her way to the customer service desk, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the eyes of other passengers on her as she walked, but she kept her head high, David's words echoing in her mind. When she reached the desk, she approached the manager, a middle-aged man named Tom Sanders. He didn't look up as she approached, his eyes glued to the computer screen in front of him. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm having an issue with my ticket. I was told it's invalid, but I'm sure it's a mistake. Could you please take a look?" Tom sighed audibly, still not looking at her. He tapped a few keys on the keyboard before finally glancing up. "If they told you your ticket's invalid, then that's how it is. We have strict rules." Evelyn's patience was wearing thin. "But I checked my ticket multiple times and it's valid. I'm just asking you to take a look." Tom raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated. "I'm not going to waste my time on this. If you don't like it, you can contact customer support online." The words stung, but it wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them, the way he didn't even bother to look at her until he was annoyed enough to care. It was the way he saw her, as someone who didn't matter, someone who could be dismissed without a second thought. Evelyn stepped back, her mind racing. This wasn't just about her ticket anymore. This was about every moment in her life when she had been treated less, every moment when someone had looked at her and decided she wasn't worth the time, the respect, the basic dignity she deserved. Evelyn's hands shook slightly as she gripped her purse. She could feel the weight of all those moments pressing down on her, but this time, she wasn't going to stay silent. Her eyes fell on the security guard standing near the counter, watching her, waiting for her to cause a scene. She knew what would happen if she didn't comply. They'd call security, remove her from the airport, and nothing would change. But she wasn't going to back down. Slowly, deliberately, Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. She unlocked it and opened the camera app. "My name is Evelyn Walker," she said quietly, her voice steady as she hit record. "I'm standing at the airport where I've been denied the right to board my flight with a ticket that I know is valid. I believe I'm being discriminated against because of the color of my skin." She panned the camera toward the manager and the security guard. Tom's expression shifted as he realized what she was doing. "You're not allowed to film here," he snapped. "I'll call the police right now." Evelyn didn't stop recording. "If anyone sees this video," she continued, looking back into the camera, "please share it. We can't let situations like this keep happening. All I want is to be treated fairly." Her heart raced as she hit the button to post the video to her social media. Almost immediately, her phone started buzzing with messages and notifications. People were already reacting, and for the first time since this ordeal began, Evelyn felt a small flicker of hope. The notifications on Evelyn's phone kept buzzing one after another as she walked away from the customer service desk. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and determination fueling her every step. She wasn't sure what would come of her video, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. The airport felt strangely quiet to her, despite the bustling crowd. As she made her way toward the boarding gate, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. This wasn't just about her ticket anymore. It was about something much bigger. The moment she posted that video, she had opened a door that couldn't be closed. But had she done the right thing? Her phone continued to vibrate, and she glanced down to see comments already pouring in on the video. People were sharing it at a rapid pace, and her followers had multiplied in a matter of minutes. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the messages. Some were supportive, others full of hate. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she read a particularly vile comment accusing her of lying for attention. She looked around, suddenly feeling very small in the crowded terminal. Was she prepared for this? Could she handle the kind of backlash that was already coming her way? The part of her that wanted to retreat, to let it all go, reared its head. But David's voice, calm and strong, echoed in her mind once again. Don't let them make you feel like you're less, Evelyn. You've earned your place. Now you stand tall, no matter what they say. Steadying herself, Evelyn put her phone back in her coat pocket and made her way to the gate. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew she wasn't alone. Her late husband's voice, her own resolve, and the growing support from strangers online kept her moving forward. As Evelyn sat down near her gate waiting for her flight to board, she opened her phone again. The video had already been shared over 1,000 times. People were commenting, tagging friends, and voicing their outrage over the way she had been treated. A notification popped up. Someone had tagged her in a post. When she clicked on it, her heart swelled with unexpected gratitude. A woman named Sarah Harris, who had been standing in line nearby, had written a public post describing how she had witnessed the entire incident. Sarah and her husband, Mark, had seen Evelyn's ticket and could confirm it had been valid. What happened to this woman was unjust and wrong, Sarah's post read. We were standing right there, and it was clear the airline was looking for an excuse to deny her boarding. This kind of discrimination needs to stop. We stand with Evelyn. Evelyn stared at the screen, feeling tears well up in her eyes. She hadn't expected this level of support, especially from strangers. The knot of anxiety in her chest began to loosen, replaced by a flicker of hope. People were watching, people cared, and suddenly she wasn't just fighting this battle alone. As more notifications poured in, Evelyn saw messages of solidarity from across the country. Prominent figures in the Black community were sharing her video. Leon Reed, a well-known civil rights activist, even posted a comment under her video stating that he would be in touch to offer his support. Evelyn's phone buzzed with a call. When she picked up, her voice wavered. "Hello? Ms. Walker, my name is Leon Reed. I saw your video, and I want you to know that what you're doing matters. This is bigger than just one incident, and we're here to help you see this through. I've already contacted a lawyer who specializes in discrimination cases, and we'll make sure your story gets the attention it deserves." Tears of relief streamed down Evelyn's face. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I didn't know what else to do." "You did the right thing," Leon said firmly. "This isn't just about you anymore. You're standing up for every person who has ever been dismissed or mistreated because of the color of their skin, and we're going to make sure this airline knows they can't get away with it." Evelyn hung up the phone, her hands shaking. She felt a strange mixture of fear and strength. The battle had only just begun, but with Leon and others by her side, she felt like she had a fighting chance. By the time Evelyn's plane landed in New York, her video had gone viral. The local news outlets were already picking up the story, and she could see that the airline, Fly America, was scrambling to do damage control. As she stepped off the plane, she checked her phone once more. A new statement from Fly America had been posted to their social media page. They claimed the incident was a misunderstanding and that Evelyn had been disruptive at the check-in counter. The statement went on to say that the airline took allegations of discrimination seriously, but that their staff had followed all proper procedures. Evelyn's stomach dropped as she read the post. "Disruptive," she muttered, incredulous. They were trying to twist the situation, to make her out to be the problem. Her hands balled into fists as she stood at the baggage claim, anger rising in her chest. How many times had she seen this play out? Black women, in particular, were often painted as aggressive or difficult the moment they stood up for themselves. This was the same narrative, recycled to protect a company's image. But Evelyn wasn't going to let them silence her. She quickly opened her phone and typed a response, her fingers flying across the screen. "Fly America's statement is false. I was not disruptive. I was calm, polite, and simply asked for my valid ticket to be honored. They denied me service because of the color of my skin, and now they are trying to paint me as the aggressor. This is exactly why we need to keep speaking out." She posted her response, tagging Fly America's official account. As soon as she hit send, her phone buzzed again with supportive comments. People were not buying the airline's attempt to shift blame, and the outrage was growing. Evelyn made her way to Marcus's apartment, the city bustling around her as the taxi navigated the streets of New York. She leaned back in her seat, thinking about everything that had happened in such a short amount of time. The thought of facing Fly America's retaliation filled her with unease, but she was resolved to see this through. When she arrived, Marcus greeted her with a big hug. "Grandma, I saw the video. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Evelyn smiled softly, running a hand through his hair. "It's all right, baby. I'm just glad to be here with you now." But her peace was short-lived. Later that evening, while sitting at Marcus's kitchen table, her phone rang again. It was her son, James Walker, calling from his office in Chicago. James, a successful executive at a major corporation, had always been fiercely protective of his mother. When Evelyn answered the phone, she could hear the anger in his voice before he even spoke. "Mom, I saw what happened. I just got off the phone with one of my contacts in the airline industry. This isn't over, and I'm going to make sure Fly America understands that they messed with the wrong person." Evelyn's heart swelled with pride and relief. James had always been her rock, even after David passed. "James, I didn't mean for all this to happen. I couldn't let it go." "You did the right thing," James said, his voice firm. "I've already contacted a lawyer. We're going to sue them for racial discrimination, and we're going to win. I won't let them get away with this." For the first time since the incident, Evelyn felt a true sense of hope. With James on her side, the battle ahead didn't seem quite as daunting. The airline might be big, but her family was strong, and they weren't backing down. The next morning, Evelyn woke up to more troubling news. Fly America had released another statement doubling down on their previous claims. This time, they alleged that Evelyn had become hostile at the customer service desk and that the security guard had been called as a result of her behavior. Evelyn's blood boiled as she read the statement. Hostile. She had done nothing but ask for fair treatment. This was a clear attempt to discredit her, to make her seem like the angry black woman stereotype that so many companies relied on when faced with accusations of racism. James called again, his voice seething with anger. "Mom, don't worry about their statement. It's all part of their strategy. They're trying to make you look bad because they know they're in the wrong, but we're not going to let them get away with it." Evelyn nodded, though the frustration still gnawed at her. "I just hate that they're lying about what happened, James. I was nothing but calm." "And we're going to prove that in court," James reassured her. "We've already got witnesses on our side. Sarah and Mark are willing to testify, and we've got the video evidence. Fly America is digging their own grave with these lies." Despite James's words, the weight of the situation pressed down on Evelyn. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her name was out there, being dragged through the mud by a massive corporation. But as she looked at the support pouring in online, she knew she couldn't back down. Evelyn spent the next few days in New York, watching as her story continued to gain traction. Leon Reed had arranged for her to meet with a lawyer specializing in discrimination cases, and they were preparing to file a lawsuit against Fly America. The public pressure was mounting. News outlets were starting to cover her story more widely, and major civil rights organizations were demanding accountability from the airline. Even celebrities had begun to speak out in support of Evelyn, using their platforms to call for justice. One evening, as she sat in Marcus's apartment, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Leon. "Evelyn, I've got good news," he said, his voice upbeat. "Fly America just contacted us. They're offering a settlement. They want to avoid this going to court." Evelyn sat up straighter, her heart racing. "A settlement? What does that mean?" "It means they're scared," Leon explained. "They know they can't win this case in the public eye, and they're trying to make it go away quietly. But we're not going to let them off that easy. We're going to make sure this settlement includes more than just money. We're going to push for real changes in their policies and a public apology." Evelyn felt a sense of relief wash over her. The battle wasn't over yet, but this was a step in the right direction. The airline was feeling the pressure, and they were starting to realize they couldn't simply dismiss her anymore. The next few days felt like a blur for Evelyn. Though she had received news that the airline was considering a settlement, the battle wasn't over. Public scrutiny weighed on her more heavily than she had anticipated. Every time she picked up her phone, there were more notifications, more messages, more comments, more reminders of the storm swirling around her. Evelyn sat in the small living room of Marcus's apartment, staring out the window as the autumn leaves swirled in the breeze. Marcus was in class, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she was alone with her thoughts. Despite the outpouring of support from the public and her family, the isolation was palpable. Her mind wandered back to the airport, to the look on the manager's face when he had dismissed her so coldly. She had replayed that moment 1,000 times in her head, wondering if she had done something wrong, if she could have handled the situation differently, but every time she came to the same conclusion. No, she had done everything right. It wasn't her fault. Still, the exhaustion was catching up with her. She hadn't slept well in days. Every time she closed her eyes, she thought about the hateful comments she had seen online. People accusing her of playing the victim, of blowing the situation out of proportion. They didn't know her. They didn't know what it felt like to live with the constant burden of being treated as less. And yet, their words cut deep. Her phone buzzed again and she hesitated before picking it up. A message from James flashed across the screen. "Mom, I'm worried about you. This is a lot to handle. Let me know if you need anything, okay?" Evelyn smiled faintly, touched by her son's concern, but she didn't want to burden him with her fears. He had his own life to manage, his own battles to fight. She typed out a quick response. "I'm fine, James. Just a little tired. I'll call you later." As she set the phone down, Evelyn leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her chest. She hadn't wanted any of this attention. She had just wanted to be treated fairly. Now it felt like the whole world was watching her, waiting for her next move. Evelyn had hoped that staying with Marcus would be a welcome distraction from the stress of the situation, but it seemed the controversy was following her everywhere. One evening, Marcus came home from class looking more tense than usual. He dropped his backpack on the floor and slumped onto the couch, his brow furrowed. "Is everything all right, baby?" Evelyn asked, sensing something was off. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not really, Grandma. Some people at school found out you're my grandma, and they've been giving me a hard time about it." Evelyn's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "Just some of the guys in my study group. They've been making comments saying stuff like, "Oh, your grandma's trying to get famous off this," or "She's just causing trouble." It's been hard to focus on school with all this going on. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. She had known that speaking out would come with consequences, but she hadn't anticipated that it would affect Marcus like this. Guilt gnawed at her insides. She had wanted to fight for justice, not drag her family into a public scandal. "Marcus, I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Marcus shook his head, offering her a reassuring smile. "It's not your fault, Grandma. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. It's hard sometimes, you know." Evelyn nodded, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "I know, baby. It's hard for me too." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation settling between them. For the first time, Evelyn wondered if she had made a mistake. She had wanted to fight for her dignity, but was it worth all of this? Was it worth putting her grandson through this kind of stress? As days passed, the comments on Evelyn's social media posts grew more intense. While there were still many messages of support, the negative voices were becoming harder to ignore. Every time she opened her phone, it seemed like another stranger was accusing her of seeking attention, of being a troublemaker. One particularly hurtful comment read, "This woman just wants her 15 minutes of fame, typical, playing the race card to get something for free." Evelyn's hands trembled as she read the words. She felt a wave of nausea rise in her stomach, her chest tightening. She couldn't understand how people could be so cruel, so willing to dismiss her pain without even knowing her story. She set her phone down, feeling the tears come before she could stop them. She hadn't asked for any of this. All she had wanted was to visit her grandson, to board her flight in peace. Now her life had become a battleground, with people she had never met lobbing insults at her from behind their keyboards. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders shaking as the tears flowed freely. She felt utterly overwhelmed, consumed by the weight of it all. For the first time since this ordeal began, she wished she could go back in time, back to the moment at the check-in counter. Maybe if she had just walked away, none of this would have happened. But deep down, she knew that wasn't the answer. She had been fighting this fight her whole life. This wasn't the first time she had faced discrimination, and it wouldn't be the last. Staying silent had never worked before. Why would it work now? Still, the exhaustion was real. The weight of the world seemed to rest on her shoulders, and Evelyn wasn't sure how much longer she could carry it. That evening, Evelyn lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Marcus was in the next room, likely asleep by now, but Evelyn couldn't quiet her mind. The anxiety had become a constant hum in the back of her head, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake it. Images from the past few weeks flashed through her mind. The cold dismissal from the airline staff, the hateful comments online, the strain this had placed on her relationship with Marcus. It was all too much. Suddenly, a sob escaped her lips, and Evelyn clapped a hand over her mouth, trying to stifle the sound. She didn't want Marcus to hear. She didn't want anyone to know how broken she felt inside, but the sobs came anyway, uncontrollable and raw. The tears poured down her face as years of pent-up frustration and pain came rushing to the surface. She cried for all the times she had been overlooked, dismissed, and made to feel like she didn't belong. She cried for the world her grandson was growing up in, a world that still treated people like her as second-class citizens. In that moment, Evelyn felt utterly defeated. She didn't know how to keep fighting. She didn't know if she could. The next morning, Evelyn woke up feeling drained. Her body was heavy with exhaustion, and her mind felt foggy from the emotional turmoil of the night before. She had barely slept, and it showed in the dark circles under her eyes. As she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, her phone buzzed with a call from James. Evelyn hesitated for a moment before answering. She didn't want to worry him, but she also knew she couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. "Mom?" James's voice was gentle, as if he could sense that something was wrong. "How are you holding up?" Evelyn let out a shaky breath, the weight of her emotions still fresh. I'm tired, James. I didn't expect all of this." James was silent for a moment, and then his voice softened. "I know, Mom. I know this is hard. But you don't have to go through it alone. We're all here for you." Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. She didn't know what she would do without her son's support. He had been her rock through all of this, just like David had been before he passed. "Thank you, James," she whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You're strong, Mom," James said firmly. "You've always been strong, and we're going to get through this. I promise." Evelyn nodded, feeling a small flicker of hope beginning to return. Maybe she couldn't carry this burden alone, but with her family by her side, she didn't have to. Later that day, Evelyn decided to take a walk. The crisp fall air helped clear her mind as she strolled through the neighborhood. The leaves crunched beneath her feet, and the cool breeze felt refreshing against her skin. As she walked, Evelyn thought about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The fight with Fly America, the backlash online, the toll it had taken on her emotionally. It had been one of the most difficult times in her life, but she had also seen an outpouring of love and support from people all over the country. She thought about Marcus and James, about the strength they had shown throughout this ordeal. They had been her anchors, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this fight. Evelyn paused for a moment, closing her eyes and breathing in the crisp air. In the silence of the neighborhood, she felt a sense of clarity begin to wash over her. Yes, this had been hard, harder than she had ever imagined, but it wasn't over yet, and if she had made it this far, she could keep going. She opened her eyes and continued walking, a renewed sense of determination rising within her. She would keep fighting, not just for herself, but for all the people who had been dismissed and mistreated the way she had. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was bigger than that, and she wasn't going to give up. Evelyn returned to Marcus's apartment after her walk, feeling a renewed sense of clarity. The weight of the past few weeks still lingered, but she was no longer overwhelmed by it. Instead, she felt a sense of purpose. As she sat down at the kitchen table, her phone buzzed. It was Leon Reed, the civil rights activist who had reached out after her video went viral. They had spoken several times since then, and Leon had been instrumental in helping her navigate the legal process. She answered the call, her voice steady. "Leon, good to hear from you." "Evelyn, I've got some news," Leon said, his voice calm but focused. "The lawsuit has officially been filed. We've got a strong case, and we're ready to take this to court." Evelyn exhaled, a mixture of relief and anxiety washing over her. This was the moment they had been working toward, but the thought of going to court, of standing before a judge and reliving everything that had happened, was daunting. "How long do you think it will take?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It could be a few months before we actually get to trial," Leon explained, "but we're already putting pressure on Fly America. The media's watching, and they're feeling the heat. They know they can't win in the court of public opinion, so they might try to settle before it goes to trial." Evelyn thought about the airline's previous attempts to twist the narrative, to paint her as the aggressor. "I don't just want a settlement," she said firmly. "I want them to be held accountable for what they did. I want them to change their policies so this doesn't happen to anyone else." "And we're going to make sure that happens," Leon replied, his voice filled with determination. "This case isn't just about you, Evelyn. It's about sending a message that companies can't treat people this way and get away with it. As they ended the call, Evelyn felt the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. This fight was no longer just hers. It had become a battle for justice, not only for herself, but for everyone who had ever been mistreated because of the color of their skin, and she was ready to see it through. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn worked closely with Leon and the legal team to prepare for the upcoming trial. They gathered witness statements, evidence, and legal documents, all while continuing to put pressure on Fly America in the public sphere. The media attention surrounding the case only grew as time passed. News outlets ran stories about racial discrimination in corporate America, using Evelyn's case as a focal point. Civil rights groups rallied behind her, demanding that Fly America issue a public apology and take meaningful steps to address systemic racism within the company. Evelyn felt the support of the community, but the preparation for the trial weighed heavily on her. She had never been involved in a legal battle before, and the idea of standing in court, facing the airline's lawyers, filled her with anxiety. One afternoon, Leon and the lead lawyer, Angela Dawson, met Evelyn at her apartment to go over the details of the case. "Evelyn, we've got a solid case," Angela said, her voice calm but authoritative. "We've gathered enough evidence to show that what happened to you wasn't an isolated incident. There's a pattern of discriminatory behavior in this company, and we're going to prove that in court." Evelyn nodded, listening intently. "What will I need to do when we go to trial?" "You'll need to testify," Angela explained. "You'll tell your story, exactly what happened at the airport. The airline's lawyers will try to poke holes in your testimony, but we'll prepare you for that. Just stick to the facts, and you'll be fine." The thought of testifying made Evelyn's stomach twist, but she knew it was necessary. She had to stand up for herself for what was right. "I can do that," she said, her voice steady. As the trial date drew closer, Evelyn's family rallied around her. Marcus, who had initially struggled with the attention the case had brought to his life, had grown more supportive as he saw the impact his grandmother's fight was having. One evening, Marcus sat down with Evelyn in the living room, his expression serious. "Grandma, I've been thinking about everything that's been happening," he said. "At first it was hard, having people at school talk about you and seeing all those negative comments online. But now, I realize how important this is. You're doing something that's going to make a difference, and I'm proud of you." Evelyn's heart swelled with emotion as she listened to her grandson. She had worried about how this ordeal had affected him, but hearing him say he was proud of her gave her the strength she needed to keep going. "Thank you, Marcus," she said softly. "I'm doing this for you too. So that one day, you won't have to deal with the same kind of discrimination I've faced." James had also been a constant source of support, using his connections in the business world to keep the pressure on Fly America. He had spoken to several influential figures in the industry, making it clear that this case wasn't going to be swept under the rug. One evening, James called Evelyn from his office in Chicago. "Mom, I've been talking to some of my contacts," he said. "They're telling me Fly America's board is getting nervous. They know they've made a mistake, and they're worried about the long-term damage to the company's reputation. They might try to offer a bigger settlement before we even get to court." Evelyn considered his words for a moment. "I don't want just money, James. I want them to admit they were wrong. I want them to change. And that's what we're going to push for," James assured her. "This case is about more than just compensation. It's about accountability." The day of the trial finally arrived, and Evelyn found herself sitting in the courtroom, her hands folded in her lap. The room was packed with reporters, lawyers, and spectators. The air buzzed with tension and anticipation. Evelyn's heart raced as she sat beside Leon and Angela, waiting for the proceedings to begin. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. But she also knew that this was her chance to make things right, not just for herself, but for all the people who had been mistreated like her. The judge entered the room, and the trial began. The lawyers for Fly America were quick to argue that the incident had been a misunderstanding, that Evelyn's ticket had been invalid due to a system error, and that there had been no intention of discrimination. They painted a picture of Evelyn as uncooperative and difficult, trying to undermine her credibility. But Angela was prepared. She presented witness testimonies from Sarah and Mark Harris, the couple who had seen the entire incident unfold. Sarah took the stand first, her voice steady as she described how Evelyn had been treated unfairly and how her ticket had been perfectly valid. "I was standing right next to her," Sarah testified. "There was no reason for her to be denied boarding. It was clear that she was being singled out because of her race." Angela also presented the video Evelyn had taken at the airport, which showed her calm demeanor and the dismissive attitude of the airline staff. The jury watched as the footage played on the screen and the tension in the courtroom grew. Evelyn's heart pounded as she watched the video, remembering how she had felt in that moment, humiliated, angry, and determined not to let them treat her like she was invisible. When it was time for Evelyn to take the stand, her hands trembled slightly, but she took a deep breath and steadied herself. This was her moment. She had to speak her truth. Angela stood beside her as she began her testimony, asking her to recount what had happened that day at the airport. Evelyn spoke clearly, describing how she had been dismissed and disrespected by the airline staff, how she had asked for a simple explanation and had been met with hostility. "I've lived with discrimination my whole life," Evelyn said, her voice filled with emotion. "But that day I realized that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to stand up for myself and for everyone who has been treated like they don't matter. I just wanted to be treated fairly." As Evelyn spoke, she could see the jury listening intently, their expressions somber. She knew that this was her chance to make them understand, to make them see what she had experienced, not just in that moment but throughout her life. When the airline's lawyer stood up to cross-examine her, Evelyn braced herself. The lawyer tried to suggest that she had overreacted, that the situation had been a misunderstanding blown out of proportion, but Evelyn held her ground. "I wasn't disruptive," she said firmly. "I was calm. I asked for an explanation, and I was dismissed. I know what I experienced, and it wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was discrimination." The lawyer tried to press further, but Evelyn's confidence didn't waver. She had told her truth, and there was nothing more they could do to shake it. After several days of testimony and legal arguments, the trial finally came to a close. Evelyn sat in the courtroom, her heart pounding as the jury deliberated. She had done everything she could. Now it was out of her hands. When the jury returned with their verdict, the room fell silent. The judge asked the foreperson to read the decision, and Evelyn held her breath. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Evelyn Walker." The words echoed through the courtroom, and Evelyn felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had won. The jury had seen the truth, and justice had been served. As the judge announced the damages Fly America would have to pay, as well as the requirement for the company to implement new anti-discrimination policies, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for everyone who had been mistreated and silenced. It was a step toward change. In the weeks following the trial, Fly America issued a public apology to Evelyn, acknowledging that they had mishandled the situation and had failed to uphold their commitment to fair treatment for all passengers. The company also announced a series of new policies aimed at addressing racial discrimination and improving training for their employees. Evelyn watched the press conference on TV, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. This was what she had fought for, not just an apology, but real change. Shortly after the trial, Evelyn was invited to speak at a press conference organized by Leon Reed and other civil rights activists. Standing at the podium, surrounded by reporters and supporters, Evelyn felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I've faced injustice my whole life because of the color of my skin," she said, her voice steady. "But we can't stay silent anymore. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who feels humiliated, undervalued, and mistreated. We all deserve respect and equal rights. And I hope my case serves as an example that we can achieve justice if we fight for it." The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt truly at peace. She had fought for herself, for her family, and for her community, and in doing so, she had helped pave the way for a better future. The weeks following Evelyn's courtroom victory were a whirlwind. Her story was everywhere on the news, across social media, and in the papers. Her victory over Fly America wasn't just a win for her, it felt like a win for all the people who had ever been mistreated because of their race, people whose voices had been ignored for far too long. Civil rights groups praised the outcome, and Evelyn was hailed as a symbol of resilience and courage. Fly America's public apology and the announcement of new policies had a ripple effect throughout the airline industry. Other companies began to review their own policies, and the conversation about racial discrimination in corporate America gained new momentum. One day, while sitting at Marcus's kitchen table, Evelyn watched a news segment about her case. The anchor discussed how her lawsuit had sparked a broader movement for accountability, and how other companies were now following in Fly America's footsteps, implementing anti-discrimination policies and sensitivity training for their staff. Marcus walked in, carrying 2 cups of tea, and sat down across from her. "You're a hero now, Grandma," he said with a smile. Evelyn chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I'm no hero, Marcus. I just did what needed to be done." But Marcus shook his head. "You're more than that. You stood up when no one else did. You made people listen." Evelyn looked at her grandson, pride swelling in her chest. She had done it for him, for his future, and for every young person who might have faced the same kind of discrimination. Her actions had paved the way for a better world, and that realization brought her a deep sense of peace. As months passed, the changes in the airline industry became more tangible. Fly America, under pressure from both the public and the legal system, made significant reforms. The company held mandatory racial sensitivity training for all its employees, revised its hiring practices to ensure diversity, and created a dedicated task force to investigate any future claims of discrimination. Evelyn received updates from Leon Reed and the civil rights organizations that had supported her. They were monitoring Fly America's progress, making sure the company followed through on its promises. Other airlines had taken notice too, and some had voluntarily adopted similar policies to avoid public scrutiny. One afternoon, Evelyn received a letter from Avery Crawford, Fly America's new CEO. Avery had replaced the previous CEO, who had resigned in the wake of the scandal. The letter was a personal note of apology and acknowledgement of the harm the company had caused. "Dear Mrs. Walker," the letter began, "I want to personally apologize for the pain and humiliation you endured at the hands of our company. While we cannot undo the harm that was done, we are committed to ensuring that no other customer is ever treated in the same way again. Your bravery in standing up for justice has set a new standard for our industry, and we are grateful for the opportunity to learn and grow from this experience." Evelyn read the letter twice, feeling a mixture of emotions. It was a rare thing to receive an apology from a corporate leader, and while it couldn't erase the hurt she had felt, it was a sign that real change was happening. Evelyn's fight became a national symbol of resilience and the power of standing up against injustice. She was invited to speak at conferences and events across the country, sharing her story and inspiring others to use their voices in the fight for equality. Civil rights organizations held her up as an example of what one person could achieve when they refused to back down. At one event, Evelyn found herself standing before a crowd of young people at a university, much like the one Marcus attended. As she stepped up to the podium, she looked out over the sea of faces, some smiling, some serious, all eager to hear her speak. "I'm not an extraordinary person," she began, her voice steady but warm. "I'm just like you. I was just a grandmother trying to visit my grandson. But when I was treated unfairly, when I was made to feel like I didn't belong, I knew I couldn't stay silent." The room was silent as she continued. "This fight isn't just about me, it's about all of us. It's about every time we've been told that we're less than, that we don't matter, and it's about refusing to accept that. We deserve to be treated with dignity and respect no matter who we are or where we come from." The audience erupted into applause, and as Evelyn stepped away from the podium, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her story had become more than just her own. It had become a rallying cry for a new generation. One quiet afternoon, Evelyn found herself back home in Chicago, sitting on the porch where she and David had spent so many evenings together. The house was filled with memories, some joyful, some painful, but all part of the fabric of her life. As she sipped her tea, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about David, about the values he had instilled in her, courage, dignity, and the belief that no one should ever make her feel like she was less than she was. He had always told her to stand tall, and even though he was gone, his voice had been with her throughout this entire ordeal. She smiled softly, feeling his presence beside her. "We did it, David," she whispered. "We fought, and we won." The victory wasn't just for her. It was for the countless others who had endured what she had endured, people who had been silenced or pushed aside because of their race. Her actions had helped shine a light on a problem that had been ignored for too long, and now there was hope for real change. Evelyn knew that the fight wasn't over. There was still so much work to be done, but she also knew that she had played her part, that her story had made a difference. In the years that followed, Evelyn's case remained a pivotal moment in the fight against racial discrimination in corporate America. Fly America's reforms were cited as a model for other companies, and Evelyn's name became synonymous with the power of standing up for what's right. She continued to speak at events, mentor young activists, and stay involved in the movement for equality. Her relationship with Marcus grew stronger, and he often accompanied her to speaking engagements, proudly supporting his grandmother's cause. One evening, as she prepared for yet another event, Marcus handed her a flyer. "Look at this, Grandma," he said, his eyes shining with excitement. Evelyn looked down at the flyer and smiled. It was for a scholarship program created in her name, the Evelyn Walker Scholarship for Social Justice. The scholarship would provide funding for young students pursuing careers in law, social work, and civil rights advocacy. "They're honoring you, Grandma," Marcus said proudly, "for everything you've done." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears as she read the words on the flyer. "I never expected anything like this," she said softly. "But if it helps more young people fight for justice, then it's worth it." She hugged Marcus, feeling a deep sense of peace. Her legacy would live on through the scholarship, through the lives of young people it would help, and through the changes she had fought so hard to bring about. In the quiet of her later years, Evelyn found peace. She no longer felt the weight of the fight pressing down on her shoulders, but she remained committed to the cause of justice and equality. Her days were filled with moments of reflection, time spent with family, and occasional speaking engagements that allowed her to share her story with others. One afternoon, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from a young woman who had received the Evelyn Walker Scholarship. "Mrs. Walker," the message began, "I wanted to thank you for inspiring me. Because of your fight, I'm pursuing a career in civil rights law. I hope to make a difference just like you did." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with pride. The fight had been hard, but it had been worth it. She had made a difference, and her legacy would live on in the work of the next generation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She had found peace, not just for herself, but for all the people who had walked this journey with her. And in that peace, she knew she had fulfilled her purpose. In the years after Evelyn's death, her name remained synonymous with the fight for justice and equality. The Evelyn Walker Scholarship for Social Justice helped dozens of young people pursue careers in law, civil rights, and social work. Fly America's reforms became a model for other industries, and racial sensitivity training became more common in workplaces across the country. Evelyn's story was taught in schools, and her video from that day at the airport became a symbol of the power of one voice raised against injustice. Her legacy lived on, not just in the policies that changed because of her fight, but in the hearts of the people she had inspired. Thank you for joining Evelyn Walker on her powerful journey. If you find her story inspiring and want to hear more impactful tales of resilience, justice, and change, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on new stories. Your support helps us share stories that spark important conversations. Together, we can amplify voices that matter. Don't miss out on the next chapter. Subscribe now.